All right, what's going on, everybody? It's about 1:30 on Monday, November the 21st. Thank you for patiently waiting for me to get my act together on this Monday morning of this short week, the week of Thanksgiving. I hope, first of all, that you and your family will have just a wonderful week, wonderful Thanksgiving. Hope it'll be a good time for at least for a day where you can slow down a little bit, enjoy some family time, enjoy some good food, and of course, not blow through it without being thankful. And we've got our regular schedule of events. Depending on when you're watching this, we do have visitation Monday night at 6:30. We do not have children's choirs and youth choirs and that type of thing on Wednesday night, but we do have our normal midweek service. It'll be a special service geared toward Thanksgiving. All right, so really encourage you to be there. And then, of course, Sunday morning, we're right back at it with everything. And hard to believe December is just right around the corner. So, this week's lesson, if you want to click on the link below, is Ruth chapter 2. I hope you are enjoying teaching through Ruth as much as I am. And as you open up the document, of course, you can do that in PDF or Word, depending on what you want to do with it. You know the routine. Here's the one thing I would tell you, sort of a teacher's nugget to keep in the back of your mind as you teach through this. Um, everybody has a an opinion on what Sunday school should be like. There are some people that think that Sunday school should basically be a self-con lesson. For example, we had a guy here years ago. He ended up moving, but he was here years ago, and he took self-con, and self-con is the greatest discipleship class you could ever take or offer. But yet he felt like we're wasting a lot of time in Sunday school. We should just be sitting down and studying the Bible. And that there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not against obviously studying the Bible, but there's a lot more to do in Sunday school. And then some people think, well, then the lessons are. Some people would think the lessons are too slow. Right? Sometimes when we repeat ourselves, teaching the vision and stuff like that, some of y'all get a little frustrated with the idea that why do we keep saying the same thing over and over again, that type of thing. Everybody's got a different opinion. Ruth is one of those books that you could spend probably a quarter of the year in. There is so much in Ruth when we just slow down and observe it. But at the same time, from my perspective, from pastor's perspective, as we plan our curriculum calendar, we're sort of roped in here at a certain time of the year, holidays, things like that. And you can't do everything, right? So we're taking basically a chapter a week. We did take 2 weeks in chapter one just because we took those first 5 chapters to sort of introduce the chapter or introduce the book study. And then this week, Ruth chapter 2, the entire thing. And a lot of people think, well, I really wish you would slow down a little bit. There's a lot of information in that chapter. Why are we waiting? The reality is we have a time frame. We have a stamp on our time. And so you're not going to be able to dive as deep as you would. But one of the things about Sunday school is encouraging people, modeling for people how to study the Bible, but then encouraging them to dig deeper themselves. And we can't cover every little thing. So think about that. There's a lot of material in chapter 2. If you stick to the outline, you'll probably do okay. So let's talk about it real quick. The title of this lesson was How Did That Happen? And for the introduction, I asked the question, have you ever been in a situation where you just ask yourself, what, not just what happened, but how did that happen, right? And you might have an example from your life that you might want to share. So, for example, just yesterday, I was getting my suit back on, getting ready to go back to choir, and I was watching a football game. It was tied 3-3. It was one of those really cold games, and there's like 12 seconds left in the ball game, so they're just going to punt it and then go to overtime. And while I'm putting my tie on, I hear the announcer going crazy, and they kicked it off, and the guy ran it back like 85 yards, and the game was over. And I was like, how did that just happen, right? And you've had other illustrations like that. Different worldviews have different explanations for why things happen the way they do. So, for example, Eastern religions believe in karma, right? What goes around comes around. I always remind people, I think a lot of Baptists think like that. And I always say, we're Baptists, not Buddhists, okay? So we don't believe in karma, right? That the reason you're having bad things happen is because you've done bad things in your past. If you're an atheist, if you're a naturalist, an evolutionist, where everything is just the survival of the fittest, then there's really no purpose to anything, right? There's no explanation for anything. It's just unfortunate that you are who you are, right? But for Christians, there's a whole different concept, and the concept is the sovereignty of God, right? The sovereignty of God, that he is actively at work, he's in control. He's working in and around our lives, even when we don't see it, even when we don't understand it. And of course, I think that's really one of the overarching themes of the book of Ruth. It's the question of what is God doing? So in chapter 2 of Ruth, we work our way through it. You'll see the outlines, very, very simple. You have the mission of Ruth, the meeting of Ruth, and then the marveling of Naomi. So, in the first point there, you've got the mission of Ruth, where she goes to glean from the leftover grain from the fields of a kind farmer so that her and Naomi would have food to eat. Now, you explain letter B there. That was a very common practice back in those days that God had established with the Israelites to help take care of those that were less fortunate. But the key you see here in this first verse, I think it's in verse 2, that humanly speaking, it talks about Ruth just happened upon this field, right? That she just happened. How did that happen, right? There's no coincidence in God's economy, right? That this was even a little thing like picking a field to glean grain from was a divine appointment that proved that God was not against Naomi, as she had sort of said at the end of the lesson we taught just this past week. So there's some discussion opportunities there. The meaning of Boaz, all right, now Boaz gets introduced to the situation. And we see in verses 3 through 13 his encounter with Ruth, the circumstances there. What I want you to really see there is, again, we come back and the story of Ruth is often told as a romance. And the reality is, he was not really showing any kind of romantic gestures toward her. He's a good man. He's a man of character. And you see that in his greeting in verse 4, that even though Ruth was known as a foreigner, he still showed her kindness and value as a human being. He praises her in verses 8 through 13 for the way she's taken care of Naomi. He's aware of the story and that type of thing. And I think verse 11 is a very important principle there, number 2, that her character was more important than her nationality. She was a Moabite. She was an enemy of the children of Israel. But yet he recognized something in her about her character. And I think there's a lot of application there. We judge people on everything except their character. Right? We make judgment calls based on skin color and do they look wealthy or do they look poor? Do they, all that type of stuff. And here's Boaz setting a beautiful example of choosing people for their character and not necessarily judging their outward appearance. And then he encourages Ruth, verses 14 through 17. The invitation to eat from the food that he's provided for his harvesters. He instructs them to leave ample heads of barley for her. I put some details in there about just how generous he really was. And what you just see is you see a man who's well off, giving compassion and generosity to a situation, to a widow who's caring for another widow. Just it shows you a lot about the character of Ruth. We've learned a lot there, but also we see a lot about the character of Boaz. Now, point number 3 is the marveling of Naomi. And this is really where the story begins to take a shift, right? So Ruth comes home and she tells Naomi all about Boaz and all about his kindness. And Naomi begins to introduce this concept of the kinsman redeemer, right? But what I want you to see, though, is in verse 20, it's like the light bulb begins to go off in Naomi's head, that she has a shift in her thinking. You remember at the end of chapter 1, her attitude is basically, you can call me bitter, right? And that was her attitude, that God's hand was against her. And it's almost now as if she's beginning to see and beginning to think, wait a second, maybe there's more to all of this than what I originally thought. So, that's verse 20 is a big verse. If I was going to put the timeline on my lesson, you definitely want to get to point number 3 and spend time in verse 20 about Naomi's shift as well as the significance of a kinsman redeemer. And you might want to do a little bit more research on that. Now, the application, the entire narrative of Ruth changes in that one verse, verse 3, when Ruth happens upon Boaz's field. Yet God was directing her. Even the accidents of the faithful, God is involved, right? And all Ruth had to do was be faithful right? That's the and that's what we're called to be, right? We're called to be faithful in the moment and let God do what God's going to do. And then when it comes to relating to other people, we have a lot of applications there. And then we look at the life of Ruth. We're beginning to put together a character composite that's worth emulating and imitating in our own lives. The courage and the willingness to take risks, the loyalty that she has to the people that she loves, the discipline to work hard and to work long at a task, the respect and appreciation she has for others. All of those are examples. But I think the main chief narrative, if you're going to stay true to the book of Ruth, is that God is at work. God is at work. And I think it's important every week to talk about the fact that your life may seem like chaos and your life may seem like there's no rhyme or reason, but as Christians we know that God is sovereign, God is in control. What do we know is true? We know that God loves us, he cares about us, that he knows every detail about us, and that he's always working. He's always working, and we can trust him. We can trust him because of the cross of the Lord Jesus Christ. So it's a great lesson. Hope you enjoy it. If you don't, that's okay. We'll teach another one next week. So have a great week. I'll be here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Obviously, I'll be in town all week. So if there's anything you need, questions, comments, shoot me a text, email, call me, whatever you want to do. And listen, I'm not just saying it because it's Thanksgiving. I really am thankful for the opportunity to serve with you. I'm really, really excited about what God is doing and what he's going to do in the new year. And I hope you have a blessed week. All right. Just a really, really blessed week. And as I said, if there's anything I can do for you, feel free to reach out. Okay. God bless.